That was quick. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be live with Mark Wightman. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Delighted to be here. So yeah, I'm Mark Wightman. I write the Betancourt Mysteries series, 2 in the series so far. The first one was called Waking the Tiger, and the new one, just out yesterday, is called Chasing the Dragon, and that's it there. So the first book, Waking the Tiger, introduced the characters and introduced the main character, who's a Eurasian detective named Maximo Betancourt, Max for short. He won't go too much into what was in the first book because people might sort of want to read it, but he was an ex-CID officer, fell on hard times, and ended up sort of reinventing himself in the Marine Police in Singapore. So this is during the colonial era in Singapore. The first book was 1939. This is 1940. And so Britain still kind of ran Singapore in those days and did for a number of years after the war. So yeah, Betancourt's job is really everything he does is around the docks and around the Singapore River, mostly to do with smuggling and that sort of thing. But every so often, well, twice in 2 books, he comes across a dead body that he has to go and investigate. And in both the stories, initially the dead bodies didn't look like murders, but thanks to Betancourt, he finds out that they actually were. So this one is American archaeologist is found apparently drowned, caught up in a fishing net. As it turns out, Betancourt's friend, we say, Dr. Evelyn Trevose, the police doctor, does an autopsy and finds 2 balls of opium in the dead man's stomach. So that gives you a little bit of clue to what's about to unfold in the book. So it covers a couple of things. I think one is, I do touch on the history of Singapore, and I don't just mean the colonial history, I mean the pre-colonial history. It actually has a long history. But for the most part, this is about opium, which at that time in Singapore, the whole opium industry was run by the government, the colonial government, which I think some people find a little bit surprising, to say the least. Yeah. So that's Chasing the Dragon.
I find it surprising, but not, if that makes sense. Yeah. There's a lot of money in the opium trade. So yeah. I would imagine the government went in on it.
There was a long trade, British trade with opium. It started in the 1600s when the East India Company first went to Bengal, and they started growing opium poppies and exporting them to China. And then in the 1800s, famously, there was a war, or 2 wars really, but a war fought with China to keep the supply lines open. China tried to stop the opium trade. Britain wasn't having it because they were making so much money out of it. And I think, when people do think about the opium trade, they think about that period, not really realizing it went on, well into the 20th century. It wasn't until after the Japanese left in 1945 that opium was finally completely stopped in Singapore. I mean, other than illegal use and illegal smuggling. But yeah, before that, the British used to import opium from India, process it and package it and sell it and run, or license, I should say, opium dens in Singapore.
We've got some hellos to start with. We've got Sarah Blackburn watching. Patricia's here. She's our delightful Scottish admin. She lives in the Kingdom of Fife.
Hi.
And champions Scottish authors. She says she's halfway through the first book and she's spoken to you because her granddad was a Crown agent.
Yes.
And
it was great. I mean, Patricia sent me some old photos that she's got from her grandfather today. And one of the photos, it just says government buildings, but in fact, it's the very building that Betancourt's office is in. And so it shows the view that he would get from his office. At that time, the Marine Police were headquartered in that building. It's now a museum, Asian Civilizations Museum. But I just thought it was really funny that Patricia sent me this photo. And I thought, oh my God, that's where Betancourt worked.
That's amazing. It must be lovely to see like old pictures of it as well. That must really help.
Yeah. It does. It's quite difficult to find a lot of pictures. I mean, there are things like the Raffles Hotel and some of the sort of more well-known things that are quite easy to find old pictures of, but but just the way that people lived their lives on a day-to-day basis, it wasn't really very well documented at all. It's one of the big challenges I've had writing both books, and partly why the research takes so long is finding real life pictures of daily life for people rather than the kind of more staged things that were for British consumption, really.
Yeah, Patsy's also gone on to say it was a great place, her grandma always said. And her granddad was murdered by the Germans going back to Singapore in 1941.
I didn't know that bit. Oh, that's very sad.
I know she talks to me about her granddad being a Crown agent, because there's another book that she gave me about it. Likes to distribute books to people as well. She's just an angel, really, in disguise.
Yeah, we'll have to meet up one day, because I don't think we live too far from each other.
You probably don't. She says she's got the backs of postcards of sorts.
Right.
Yeah, we talked, didn't we, before we went live, about the fact that there's been quite a gap between the two books.
Yeah, it has. So Waking the Tiger came out June 2021, and I started work on this, the second book, not long after it, but just kind of due to my process and various other things, it took about a year to complete. And a lot of that is to do with research. I research a lot. There's a school of thought that amongst writers that you shouldn't do too much research. You should just get on, get the story down, get the first draft out the way, and then start to worry about sort of polishing the details. But that isn't the kind of research that I do. I don't research facts very much. If I come across them, I'll note them down. But as I was saying earlier, it's very much about the way that people live their lives. That's the thing that I really try to research, because I think without that, I couldn't write the books. I couldn't just make up a generic sort of story and fit Singapore, 1940s Singapore around it. It just doesn't work that way for me. I need to be inspired by the things that I find out. And as I say, it's pretty difficult. There are lots of memoir-y type things by European expats that were written at the time, my time in Singapore sort of thing. But for the Chinese and the Malays and the Indians, the hundreds of thousands of people that came out to Singapore to work, to look for work, there's very, very little. And it takes a lot of research for me just to get a feel for the kind of story that I want, because the stories, I don't start off with a plot in mind at all. I start off with a setting, I start off with the people, and then I wonder what they'll get up to, and that's a lot of that's guided by history, by real history.
But I think the difference is, if you're writing like a police procedural or like a detective book, you probably can get the story down and then go back and do the research. I think if you're writing something historical, from a lot of the authors I've spoken to who've done it, the research is like so deep, because you've got to even get the language right, like the words that were used at the time and the food that was available at the time, and there's so many little details that you can't help but do it as you go.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, even I still make the odd mistake, and I assume sometimes that something would have been around or would have been available, and it turns out it wasn't. I remember had an early draft of Waking the Tiger. I'd gone on about them using penicillin, and I assumed, well, it must have been around for ages, surely, But it turns out it wasn't. It wasn't actually. They wouldn't have had penicillin at that time. That's quite a simple example, but you've got to be really careful to be true. I think be true to history. It's very important to me. I never feel comfortable when I hear historical writers talking about, you can just bend the history a bit. I don't think that's right. I think stay true to the history, make your story completely, fictional, make your story up. But if you're engaging with history, which you should, in my opinion, if you're writing historical, is keep the history true. It was people's lives. That's important to me. And as I say, so it took me quite a while just to do the research, just even to get a feel for what I wanted the story to be. And then I'm the world's worst procrastinator. I mean, I'll find any reason to put off actually hitting the keyboard. I'm not one of these people, I wish I was, but I'm not one of these people who just like bang out 3,000 words a day and maybe polish it later. I take a lot of care over over the writing. So it takes a while, but the book was finished mid-end of last year, I think, and then it went through edits and what have you. So it's been out for, well, it's been finished, sorry, for since about the start of the year. Then we got the whole publication process after that.
Got a few more people who've joined us. Malcolm's said good evening, Malcolm Hollingrake.
Hello, Malcolm.
Yeah, Sam said hello. Mark, she's seen a lot of great reviews for Chasing the Dragon.
Thank you.
Sarah's followed that up with that she loved both books. Are you writing a third?
Right, so a little bit about that in general. When I first came up with the idea for Waking the Tiger, for the characters and the setting for Waking the Tiger, I had in mind 5 books. And at that time, I think when I very first wrote the first draft, it was set in 1935, so it was slightly earlier. And I was going to write 5 books, and that would take us up to the Japanese occupation in 1942, because I didn't want to write about the Japanese occupation. I certainly didn't want to write about the war. That just doesn't interest me at all. So that was what I had in mind. I had ideas, but in writing Waking the Tiger, I realized I was going to miss an opportunity, because Betancourt, for those that read the books, Betancourt has this constant running battle with his bosses, the colonial police and the government. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if he had to do everything he does under the Japanese? How would he feel like that? And I had this idea that Betancourt would just see it as one more, lot of colonial overlords to be pleased. And obviously, there were some horrible things went on during the Japanese occupation. I'm not trying to belittle it at all, but I thought from his perspective, as the character's perspective, it might be really interesting to write some stories about life in Japanese occupied Singapore, as well as life in British Singapore. So that's the kind of plan. I'm still thinking 5, possibly 6 books. That's as far as I've got with ideas. There's one book actually that I'm really looking forward to writing, which happens after the Second World War, where Betancourt gets to go on a treasure hunt, which, yeah, I won't say any more about it, because that's about as far as I've got with the idea. But yeah, there's some very real history about this. The Japanese, like the Germans in Europe, went around looting buildings and confiscating paintings and valuables and what have you. And the Japanese general is reputed to have squirreled all this stuff away in the Philippines, and people still look for it to this day. And it was staged through Singapore. So it just kind of got my my creative juices flowing, gave me all sorts of ideas about what might have happened. So yeah. So is there going to be another one? Yes. I don't know when, but there'll definitely be another one.
It'll be worth the wait.
It'll be worth the wait. Oh, I certainly hope so.
You've got more. You've got a lot of fans. Donna said good evening, and she loved the book. Patsy said her granddad was high up in the government. He had a house high up the hill. Is that true? That because Singapore, it's tight for land, isn't it? So like the further up you go, the kind of wealthier.
Yeah. It's also a little bit cooler as well, which is quite appealing. When you're down at the sort of sea level, it gets pretty hot, pretty humid as well. So yeah, so people who could afford nice houses lived up in the hills. So they're not really very high hills, but they're definitely a little bit cooler. You get breezes and that sort of thing. And there's still some lovely old buildings that can be seen, the old black and white buildings.
Leslie said she loved the last book. Leslie is probably at the same place as me, because I read the last book and really enjoyed it. And book 2 is on my Kindle, and I started it last night, but I'm not very far in.
Right.
In like full honesty, but just because I fell asleep. In my defense, I've been very busy, but it was it's looking to be really good.
Thank you for reading it.
I know, I really enjoyed the first one, and I think it's like we were talking before we went live, weren't we? That you were on the debut list for.
Yeah.
I think we shortlisted for New Blood.
Yeah, so I was. The book came out in June 21, and I heard about 3 weeks afterwards that I'd been longlisted for the McIlvanney Prize and shortlisted for the Scottish crime debut of the year, which was just like a total shock. I mean, I couldn't really process it at first. And I think because it happened so quickly, I didn't have time to get used to the book being out in the world and people talking about it and things. So I didn't win the debut prize, but to be shortlisted was just phenomenal. Robbie Morrison won it with a great book. And then following that, I was shortlisted in 2022 for the John Creasy New Blood Dagger, the CWA Dagger Award, which again, even when it got I heard it was long listed, I was like, wow, that's something else. And that's kind of really, reached a sort of achievement. But to get shortlisted, my God. So we had to go down to the CWA big gala dinner. And I'm just like, even at my age, like kid in the sweetie shop watching all these famous people sort of wandering past. Didn't win that one either, but it was quite an honor to be chosen for that. And we were also shortlisted. I was also shortlisted for the Niall Marsh Awards, which is a New Zealand award. My wife and I are both New Zealand citizens. We used to live there, and I was shortlisted for that as well in the end of 2022. So the book did incredibly well, way beyond my dreams.
But we said this when both me and Sam said this when we were interviewing the McIlvenney and the debut authors this year. Those lists by Bloody Scotland genuinely are always full of really top quality books. So it's a sign of like quality writing that you were on there, even shortlisted.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I look at the McIlvenney Prize every year, and I think, oh my God, these people, how do they do it year after year after year? There's never ever bad books on those lists. There's never one that you say, oh, how did that get on? They're all great books, and increasingly they're quite diverse and different types of stories, still under the crime umbrella, of course, but some very different types of stories coming up, which is terrific.
Yeah, they are genuinely one of the few prize kind of lists that I'll go and constantly read all of, because they're all going to be great. Donna has said, with your first book doing so well, has that changed all your goalposts for your career as an author?
That's a great goalpost. I didn't have any goalposts. I'll be really honest. I didn't have any goalposts. I wanted to write. I wanted to be a published author. I had this in my head for ages and ages, and I wanted to be a published author. And that was as far as it got. And when Hobeck Books first said they wanted to publish it, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be published. And then I was, but I didn't have any goals to start with. I think getting the award nominations did change my attitude to myself. It made me take myself a little bit more seriously as a writer. I mean, I can get quite down on myself at times, and I think with other people saying this is a good book, really made me think, I should stick at this and I should stick in at it. And also the experience of writing Waking the Tiger, which was a long process, made me a better writer. No question at all. When I approached Chasing the Dragon, I was already in a better place than I was when I started the first book. So I still don't have any terrific goals. I mean, it's very satisfying when people say they like the book and people, read it and post things on social media about it. That makes me feel good. But a few more shortlistings would be good, and then maybe win something one day. That'd be nice.
People underestimate the effect of even just being on the shortlist for an award, or like a runner-up in an award or something. It still makes you realize that other people think that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that, I'm not the only person who writes books to feel imposter syndrome. It's quite a common thing. And that even when people say, oh, I really enjoyed your book, I'm going, really? and I think getting those short listings and long listings really made me think somebody has looked at this book objectively. They've read it, looked at it objectively, and they've said it's worthwhile being long listed or short listed. And I think that did a lot for me for getting rid of that imposter syndrome. I still get it from time to time. When I'm actually in the process of writing, I think, oh God, why did I ever do this? You know, I can't do that. I can't write. I can't do this. You stupid man, why are you doing it?
Leslie said, is Chasing the Dragon. We did touch about this, didn't we? It's about the opium trade. She said, is it about drug trafficking?
It is. Is it about drug trafficking? No.
Trade, but
yeah, it's about the drug trade. Very definitely about the drug trade in Singapore in 1940. It isn't about, say, smuggling, for instance. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but it's not. It's not really about that. It's about the drug trade and corruption and the way that things happened at that time. I think it's probably the best thing to say. Yeah. So Betancourt, the character, that's what he does. That's kind of his day job, is trying to find smugglers, bringing things into Singapore. This story did not come out of that side of his job. It came from somewhere else.
You would imagine that would be what a lot of the job is if you were like a marine kind of police.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. Marine police did have jurisdiction over the whole of the port area. So, and this is the interesting thing about Betancourt's job and why he sometimes comes into conflict with his superiors, is they were the police force for the whole of the dock area and the river as well. But as you said, most of what they did was to do with trade and smuggling and boats and things like that. But when, as in the books, and occasionally murder happens, then Betancourt exerts his authority and says, "This is my patch. I'm gonna look into it,"
which is great. You told me again before we go live that you're off to Singapore.
Yeah, off to Singapore in 5 weeks, I think it is. 5 weeks yesterday. We're on our way to New Zealand, going back to New Zealand, and we're going to stop off in Singapore for 5 days, which is going to be interesting because every time I've been back to Singapore, I used to live there, right? I was brought up in Singapore. I lived there till I was 21. And every time I've gone back since, which is kind of roughly every 10 years, it's just changed dramatically. And you think, every time you go, you think you can't change anymore. And then it does. It just... It was incredible. Back for about 15 years. So we're going to go back in 5 weeks' time, and I'm just going to go and walk the streets. I did I include maps in both the books, and I used old maps to guide my writing. And I just want to go and walk those streets again, and just imagine myself as Betancourt and doing, things that Betancourt does.
It must have helped then having that sort of experience of growing up there, because when you spend time living in a country, you do sort of see a very different side of it, don't you? You sort of see more than you ever would visiting as a tourist. So that must really help in writing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I genuinely don't believe I could have written these books had I not lived there at that time. Even if I'd lived there now, I could not project back because there's no points of reference really left. I mean, there are parts of Singapore that have been preserved, parts of Chinatown, but they're very different to what they were. The buildings, the facades of the buildings are the same, but life is utterly different. And I was very fortunate. My family moved to Singapore in 1969. I was quite young still, and we'd lived in Hong Kong first, which kind of prepared me for it, and then moved to Singapore. And I was at a very fortunate time. Singapore was in transition. It had been independent for about 4 years. So Malaysia first became independent from Britain in the mid-60s, and then Singapore was part of Malaysia after independence. And then Singapore and Malaysia had a big falling out, and Singapore went independent again. That was all unplanned, but it went completely independent in sort of mid to late 60s. So we were in this new country, finding out how to be a country. But at the same time, there's an awful lot of the old Singapore still there. You could see the things that I write about in the books. You could go and see firsthand the way that people lived. So I have those memories. So as well as all historical research I do have memories of semi-old Singapore, and it stood me in really good stead. As I say, I couldn't have written the books otherwise. I wouldn't have got the feel for them, I don't think.
No, and I think that's interesting, isn't it? Of that kind of concept of people who write books set in other countries. I do feel like you can tell the author is really sort of
it's
in knowing the country.
It's a difficult. I mean, you'll read books yourself sometimes. I know I do that. You just think, well, this person's just been there. You know, they've gone on holiday there or something. You know, because they don't seem to have any particular feel for the place. They might describe the settings well. From pictures or whatever. I don't know how they do it, but they don't have a genuine feel for the. Everywhere has a feel. You know, Scotland, there's a feel for it, and I sometimes read some writers, particularly American writers, and they just don't seem to get it in the same way. And I think that's really important, because one of the things I have had comments about is that I've been able, and through Waking the Tiger, certainly, to take people to that period of time in that place and make it come alive for them, which is very gratifying to hear. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I did it for myself at first. You know, I'll be honest, when I first started writing Waking the Tiger, it was to take myself back and see what I could remember, and kind of a bit of a love story to Singapore, because I loved my time there.
Patricia is very up for meeting you for a chat.
All right, that'd be good.
Her dad's family really shut down on it, so she would like to know more about it. Malcolm wants to know where in New Zealand.
We live in a place called Omaha, which is about, well, it used to be an hour and a half north of Auckland, but I believe they've now built a motorway, so it's about an hour north of Auckland now. It's on the coast, on the east coast of the North Island.
Donna has said that she listened to the Hobeck podcast this morning, and it was interesting to hear about the difficulties and not including the feelings about partition.
Yeah, I've not heard it yet. I haven't. I have to go and listen to it tonight. Obviously, I remember doing it. But yeah, so what particular difficulties was it? Sorry?
Not including your feelings about partition, it says.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think I know what this is about. It's about not. I try very hard not to impose my own political views on a story. I don't use the stories as vehicles to say what I feel and about things. I have my own views on colonialism in general, and colonialism as it was practiced in Singapore, which had a few nuances. But I don't want this to be about me. I don't want to use the characters as a vehicle for my thoughts. I went to see Eleanor Catton, who wrote The Luminaries and Birnam Wood, a few weeks ago at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and I thought she put this brilliantly, because she was talking about writing Birnam Wood, which is, if you haven't read it, it's quite a political book, modern politics, and she said that she had to be as hard on herself as she was on the characters. So if she was going to take her characters to task over their political views, she had to be careful that she took herself to task as well. And by that she meant not just opening up her views and putting them through the characters. And I do the same. So I have my views on colonialism. I don't know, you tell me. I think they probably come out, or you might be able to guess what my views on colonialism are from these books. But the books are not about me. This is not they're not my mouthpiece. And it's something I have to work quite hard on. I have to keep remembering this should be seen through the eyes of the characters. What would these characters think? And even if that's not what I think, if it's consistent for them to behave and to think in that way, then that's the way it should be.
That's just the act of good fiction, isn't it? Expressing your characters' views and going their way, even if it's not necessarily, because everyone's gonna. Not all crime writers think like a serial killer, do they? But
I think that's one of the good things about writing series as well. You get to know your characters better. I think the characters start to develop, and they have their own, their own stories. And I certainly feel I know Betancourt better now than after 2 books than I did, even after 1, or certainly at the start of 1.
So you mentioned about your process, like taking quite a long time writing. Is that partly, do you keep quite detailed notes about people so that you go through the series, you don't sort of give people the wrongful eyes or different
I do. I'm probably not as studious about that as I should be. But no, as I say, it's more about the history itself. I'm a slow writer. Right, that's the first thing. I can't just bang out words. I know the school of thought says, just get the words down and then tidy them up afterwards. I can't do that. I have to think about it as I'm going, and I also edit as I'm going. I can't write bad words and just leave them there. I have to go and sort them. So the process is a bit slow, but as I say, really, it's the research that takes the real time for me, because it takes me a good finite amount of time just to get to the point where I think, okay, I think I know what this story's about, let alone what it actually is. And that took me a long time with Chasing the Tiger. I went down I think I had 3 story threads that I was interested in, and I tried to include all of them in the first draft of the book. And I'd got about, I don't know, maybe a third of the way in, and I gave my wife a little presentation. I said, right, this is what the story's about. Tell me what you think. So I had this flip chart thing, and it's about this. And I could tell after about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, she just glazed over. And I said, well, it's not very good, is it? And she just shook her head. No. And what she said was, I was trying to do far too much with the story. I had 3 distinct, separate story threads in there. And she said, no, just pick one. Which one do you like? And I said, well, I like the opium story. She said, right, write the opium story. And once I got over that hurdle, it got a lot easier. It got a lot easier, because then the book had room to breathe. The story had room to breathe, which you need. And it's tricky. But the research takes up a lot of time. I probably take more time on it than I should, because I find it fascinating. But that's where I get my ideas from. So if I don't do it, I won't get the ideas.
It's good that you've got an honest wife. Shouldn't just sit there and nod and go, these are opera.
No, definitely not. No, that was a fantastic piece of advice. So I had 2 great pieces of advice. And in Waking the Tiger, the very first draft was actually, the story is quite different, actually, the very original draft. But somebody said to me, you're writing a history book, a historical fiction book here, but there's no history in it. The setting, I told them it was 1939. I told them it was Singapore and all that sort of stuff. But there's no engagement with history. And I think the best historical fiction always engages with real history. So Abir Mukherjee and Vasim Khan, writers like that, they're very good at this, that they'll take events from real history and bring them into their stories and have their characters, their fictional characters, engaging that history. So I tried to do that. And once I think that was how I managed to fix Waking the Tiger, was starting to engage with real history.
But then again, like we were going back and saying about having that deep knowledge of the country that you're writing it in, Abir and Vasim both have that about where they're writing their books. They've sort of travelled and lived there and learned all the things, and maybe that's why you get that deep kind of understanding in their books.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is you have to care. They both care about India, Bengal, and about Mumbai, and I care about Singapore. Without that, I think you'd just be using the setting as a backdrop. It's like a backcloth on a theatre set, and I don't think the authenticity would come through, and I don't think the passion, if that's not too grand a term, would come through either. You do need to care about the place. It's no good just going on holiday for 2 weeks somewhere and say, oh, I think I could write a book about this. You could do, of course you could, but whether or not it would come across, I don't know. Don't think so.
I think it sounds, I've never been to Singapore, but it sounds like an incredibly vibrant place from the books I have read there. I've travelled there in your books and Neil Humphrey's books, and it sounds like a fascinating kind of world, because there's a big mixture of cultures, isn't there, in the city, which must make it quite interesting.
It does. And it's one of the things I remembered about when I lived there at the time. As I said, lived in Hong Kong for 3 years before that, which was a Chinese place. It was, apart from the British colonial type, so it was a Chinese place. But when they moved to Singapore, you have Chinese, you have Malays, you have Indians, you have Eurasians, and it is true multiculturalism. There's a lot of talk about multiculturalism these days, but that is true multiculturalism, where you get these different cultures living side by side, celebrating their own cultures, nobody trying to homogenize them, and they borrow from each other's cultures. And in the case of Singapore, there's no better example than the food. The food is out of this world, and it's a blend of all these different influences that have come, from all over Asia. So yeah, it's a great place in that sense.
Donna said she loves it when she reads and learns something too. I think, were you on the list at the same time as Alistair Liddell?
Yes, yeah, Alistair and I were on there.
Set in like Georgia. I absolutely adore those.
Yeah. Alistair, he worked in Georgia for a number of years, I think, and I was lucky enough to read one of the advanced copies of his most recent book, and it's fantastic. I just got immersed in it. Again, it's like going on holiday to somewhere, but it's better, because you get all these local insights into the place, and you actually find yourself being there. I finished Alistair's book in about 2 days, and for 2 days I was in Georgia. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I feel like that about his books. They're amazing, aren't they? Mm. And again, you've got that lovely, like, just sheer local knowledge.
Yeah.
Like you said, of like the places and the food and the culture and the wine. He has a lot of wine in his book.
Yeah, I think he's looked in a fact about Georgian wine. Is Georgian wine not the oldest recorded wine or something? I'm sure that was what it was. Georgians were making wine, way before the French or whomever.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. The originating place, isn't it, or something of wine? Yeah. And an amphora with it that dates back way before the wine production.
Right. I think. Yeah.
I got a chance to chat to him about his third book recently. Donna says, except maybe the heat and corruption. I think everywhere has heat and corruption now, doesn't it? Some places are more honest about the corruption.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that when I was recently writing Waking the Tiger, I had a quote about whenever you get men and money, you're going to get corruption. So
I think, yeah, but it's people. My dad, we lived in Istanbul for a while when I was young, and my dad got a police ticket on the way to doing a presentation to the chief of, like, the police headquarters somewhere, and he went in and made a joke about it, like, I'm going to get a collection of them around the world, these like parking tickets, it'd be great, and it just disappeared.
Right.
To be forgotten about, if you know what I mean. They're like, no, like, this isn't a thing. But at least it's kind of open. Like, it's there everywhere, but it's like some places it's a bit more open.
Yeah, I think there's still places like that. My dad was a sales, when we lived in Singapore, the reason that we went to Singapore, my dad was a sales rep for a company that sold printing equipment, and his sort of patch was the whole of Southeast Asia. And Singapore was comparatively sort of clean and corruption free. But some of the stories he told about some of the other places, Indonesia and Vietnam and Cambodia, and make your hair curl. And it was absolutely accepted that was the way business happened, and he had to learn very quickly about how to do business in those places.
Yeah, but it's, my dad's got some good stories as well. It's I think that's just what makes, like, living somewhere interesting, isn't it? Because you see those things. So what teasers can you tell us about book 3, if you've got an idea of?
Right. What can I tell you about book 3? So the working title, it's just the working title, is The Bobbed-Haired Assassin. And it's inspired by a true story. It wasn't during the time that I'm writing about it, it was earlier in the 20th century, around the mid-20s, and it's in Kuala Lumpur in what's now Malaysia. A young Chinese woman, who looked remarkable because at that time most of the Chinese women were dressed with long hair, sort of ponytail or a pigtail, and she had short hair, she had short bobbed hair. And she walked into the office of a British official with a briefcase, put it down on the case, on the desk, and said, "This is for you," and it exploded. so she'd obviously tried to kill this guy and herself, I think. And this could caught fire, became viral, whatever the 1926 equivalent of viral was in the papers. And she was christened the Bobtailed Assassin. And she was an anarchist. So I then went and researched the whole thing about anarchism. And it was a very kind of organized movement. It wasn't just crazy people. It was a very organized movement. And they had rules that you had to live your life by and all that sort of thing. So that set the wheels in motion. So whether the book ends up being called The Bobtailed Assassin or not, I don't know. But the one thing I'm not sure about is how to retell the story at a different time. If you're telling something that, you know, is based on fact, how much can you borrow, and, you know, what can you do? So if there's any other historical fiction writers out there who know how to do this, tell me, because I'm really, really fascinated by that incident. And yeah. So it's going to be, at least in part, about anarchism.
The only person I know who borrows real life things is, have you ever read Robert J. Lloyd?
No, I haven't.
His books have Robert and an assistant solving crimes. And they use, and obviously real people, Robert Hooke existed, and so did his assistant. But he's used real events and like changed when they've happened. And sometimes like he used one real event and then like everything that happens after is not real, if you know what I mean.
Right. I know Nicola.
I don't think that's quite how you're sort of planning to use it, but he's the only person I know who has done something similar.
Nicola Upson did something similar, but she did it the other way around. So there was I don't remember this myself because I was in Singapore at the time, but apparently there was a kind of wave of terror, reign of terror in Cambridge in the 70s, I believe. Somebody was christened the Cambridge Rapist, went around causing havoc. And she used that idea, but took it back to, I think it's the 30s, where her Josephine Tay stories are told. So she'd kind of done it in reverse, which is very clever, I think. But yeah.
So yeah, there'll be a way of doing it.
There'll be a way of doing it.
I mean, again, maybe because of when it happened and where it happened, you can get away with it a little bit more because
possibly, yeah.
I might not know it as much.
Yeah.
How are your books? Are your books out in Singapore?
No, they're not released. They're not published in Singapore, and I don't think Amazon has an outlet. But I mean, I know for a fact that people friends of people I know in Singapore read the book, so quite where they're getting it from, I'm not sure. But I mean, some of them order them direct from Hobeck, and Hobeck send them out. But I've had feedback. I had feedback actually from 2 Eurasian friends, and this is the thing I was most concerned about a white writer writing about a Eurasian character. It's potentially fraught with difficulties, and I was waiting with trepidation to see what they thought about it. And they both thought it was great. They thought it was spot on. I'd got everything right that I needed to get right. So that was a huge relief. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, when you're writing about something that, even though I grew up there, people don't consider me, Singaporean because I'm not Chinese, Malay, Indian, Eurasian, or whatever. And there is almost this thing about, do you have the right to write about that sort of stuff? And I think you do. But you have to treat it with the utmost respect. You have to do the research. You have to get things right. Even to the extent that I investigated the whole Eurasian community, and I wrote to the Singapore Eurasian Association, and they were very helpful with me about their history, where they came from. And so I think as long as you do that and you remain respectful of your subject, I think there's no reason why you couldn't shut. I mean, how boring would it be if all I could write about was trips to Tesco? Because that's all I have firsthand to affect. That'd be terrible, I think. Yeah, but be respectful.
Respectful and well researched. You obviously know what you're talking about when it's being read by people with that experience, and they're saying you've done everything right. You've done your research right, haven't you? To be able to.
Yeah, the research kind of soaks in after a while. So I now feel sometimes. I know firsthand things I absolutely don't know firsthand because I wasn't around then, but it feels like I do because I've researched it so much, and because I do also have that link of having lived there in the 70s to join it all up for me. So when I write stuff in these books, I mean, I can see it as clear as day. I can see those streets, and I can even the behaviors of people and the way they talk. I'm not just, I am making it up, but I'm not just making it up. I can see them in my mind's eye that's how they would behave.
Can you actually picture the things as you write?
Yes, I can. And I find if I'm writing and I don't do that, it just ends up dead. It's dull, and it's if I'm really making it up, forcing it, it doesn't work for me at all. And I have to go back to find some way into a scene where I can get to that point where I do picture it. In this book, there's an exchange with hotel owner. And that was as vivid as if it was happening in front of me. Once I'd got in tune with the scene, it just happened. It actually happened. The same in the first book. There's an Australian racehorse trainer, Bill Allenby, and he was an absolute joy to write. And very, very quickly, I wasn't making it up anymore. I was, but I didn't feel like I was. It just came really naturally. I was very pleased with Bill.
The Australian racehorse trainer. I think he was a really good character in the book. It's been a while since I read the book, but when you said it, I went right back to going, yeah, I know who that is. Donna has said, will you be at Bloody Scotland?
I will be. As I said, we're getting ready to go away, so we're kind of in panic mode trying to get the house sorted out and things, but I intend to be there on Saturday. Possibly for Pitch Perfect. So I won Pitch Perfect at Bloody Scotland in 2017. That's what kicked me off on this whole thing. I pitched the original idea for Waking the Tiger, and I won Pitch Perfect. So I tried to go back every year to support the people who are appearing, and we usually get asked to stand up at half time when the judges are deliberating and just talk a little bit about our story. But also a very good friend of mine, Natalie Marlowe, is appearing on one of the panels on Saturday about the 30s, Tom Mead and somebody else who I can't remember, I'm afraid. So I'd like to go along and support her.
Lovely. Donna has said she will seek you out.
I did actually see you in Harrogate, Donna, but we didn't manage to speak. I think we kept missing each other.
I was at Harrogate as well.
Oh, there you go. I was only really there for the one day, the Friday, I think. And I was in tents and things and events for quite a bit of it.
Yeah, I only snuck in on Friday evening because I was at work until then. I am impressed that you are not going away for 5 weeks and you're already getting ready to
go. Yes. It's amazing. We're trying to clear the house out to have a very, very belated spring clean, and it's just the amount of stuff that you accumulate is incredible. Anyway.
I'm a last minute travel anywhere kind of pack and be organised person.
I think if I was going for 2 weeks, I would be. That's what I'm normally like, pack the night before or occasionally the morning. But if you're going for 6 months, you're effectively going, you're moving your life for a period of time. Everything you'll need on a day-to-day basis, you've got to take with you. So dreading to see how heavy my suitcase will be.
Yeah, I'm still going to say I've been away for months and still packed I think we packed the hour before we went to the airport.
I'm impressed.
There's chaos gremlins in my household, I think. Donna says she's easier to spot because she's got bright pink hair.
Yes, I did spot her from a distance at Harrogate.
Talking to somebody. I'm normally easy to spot because I'm wearing things covered with dinosaurs.
I did meet Sarah. We said hello, Sarah Blackburn.
Yeah, Sarah's lovely, isn't she? She's great to meet.
Yeah, she is. I'm a big fan of the book, big supporter of the books, which is very gratifying.
I always introduce Sarah to people by going, she's the one person in the world I've ever met from the same place as me.
All right.
Which is really nice. Nice to know that it does exist and other people were born there. So yeah, that's just validated my existence by being another person in the world in the same place as me, which is really nice. Which is also really fun to go to book events with and talk to. So we're coming up to the end of the chat. Finish us off by telling us what you've read this year that you've really enjoyed.
Oh wow, I've actually done well this year. I've read about 25 books, which is quite a lot for me. I think the one that what have I read that I've really enjoyed? Quite a few. Some different ones. So Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. I love Eleanor Catton's writing. I love The Luminaries. I've read it 3 times and I get something more out of it every time. Burnham Wood's very, very different. It's very modern. It's a thriller, an eco-thriller. But that was great. I'm belatedly come to John le Carré. I did a master's degree at UEA, and we read some of his stuff on that. But I read a book this year called Agent Running in the Field, which was different to the sort of Smiley's People type thing. It's still about the world of spying, but it's very, very good. I really enjoyed that. I read an excellent book called Disorientation. I can't remember off the top of my head the woman's name that wrote it. I'll get it wrong if I say it, so look it up. It's called Disorientation. I haven't read Yellowface, but I believe that there's some similarities between Yellowface and Disorientation, and it was very good. It was funny in places, but a very sort of dry humor, and it casts a lot of light on the whole identity politics thing. So that was good. I'm trying to think of all the crime books that I've read this year. I'm in the middle of a Robert Goddard, who I love. I love Robert Goddard. Borrowed Time. It's called Borrowed Time. But yeah, I need to go and consult my list because I've been keeping a list this year. That's the other thing, because I never remember what I've read. So I've actually been writing everything down. That read a couple of fantasies as well. I read Rivers of London by Ben Aranovich. I hadn't read any of his stuff before, so that is crime, but there's a fantasy element to it, a magic element to it, which was really good. Very different for me. So that was good.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Rivers of London. Massive fan. Absolutely love the series. And Sarah Painter.
All right.
She writes kind of urban fantasy stuff. She's from, I want to say, near Edinburgh. Her books are set in London. They're a bit magic and a bit private, but not magically as Rivers of London.
I will look them up.
So if you like, because I think Rivers of London is kind of like, it's a bit more out there than a lot of people are comfortable with.
Yeah. It was interesting because I'd never read anything like that before. I don't really read fantasy. I think I read Lord of the Rings when I was about 15 or something. So it took me a while to get my head around. There's all this magic stuff going on, and there's the whole sort of police procedural, crimey thing going on as well. So I had to read it quite closely at first. But once I got into it, very good, very funny as well.
See, I adore those, but I went to them from the Dresden Files, which is by Jim Butcher, an American author, and that's about the only wizard for hire in Chicago, and he solves crimes and stuff. But they're way more out there than Rivers of London, even if you know what I mean. There's fairies and all sorts in them. So once you've read that, Rivers of London's fairly okay. Sarah's giving you who Disorientation is by.
There you go, Elaine C.A. Chu. Thank you very much. Yeah, she's an American Chinese writer.
Yeah, she did a Google search. Apparently. Can you read crime when you're writing crime?
Can I? Yes. Should I? No, probably. I do it, but I'm a real sponge. So I will soak up ideas from people. And it's a bad thing when you're writing. You've got to write your own book. And the worst for me, it's two of my favorite crime writers. well, my three favorite crime writers: Mick Herron, John Banville, now that he's come out of his Benjamin Black shell, and an Australian writer called Peter Temple. He's unfortunately died a few years back. Brilliant writer. Strongly advise you to read his Jack Irish series and his other books, Truth and The Broken Shore, masterpieces. Truth in particular is probably the best crime book I've ever read. But if I read anything like that I'm really into, it doesn't do me any good, because it just like sends my writing senses out of whack. And I just want to write like Mick Herron, or I want to write like John Banville, which I can't do because I'm not them. So it's probably a good idea if I don't read. I know, as a writer, you have to read. I mean, that's how you learn to write. But when I'm actually in the middle of the process, it doesn't do me much good.
I think you obviously, I get what you're saying, but you clearly have quite a unique voice in crime fiction anyway. I can't think of a lot of books with the like setting and era of yours, if you know what I mean. I can't think of a lot more that are out there like that. So it must be, like, I can see that you could get influenced by people, but you've got such a unique voice in what you're writing that it must be quite easy to keep that going, in a way.
Yeah. It's like I was saying earlier, when I get into the groove, sometimes it is comparatively easy, but at other times it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's really hard work, but I find that when it is hard work is when I don't write so well. So I almost need to kind of walk away from it, but equally I can't, because I'm usually late, because I procrastinate so much anyway. It's hard to say I'm going to put it aside. I just have to find a way of working my way back into it again.
Maybe you're just embracing the Douglas Adams style of writing.
Deadlines. Yeah, I like the whooshing noise they make as they go past.
He's classic, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Postal lines. And a good fantasy author.
Absolutely. I did a short course at Edinburgh University last year on writing for radio and podcast, and we studied the scripts for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and they are amazing. I mean, just to read them as scripts is an amazing experience, because I remember it being on the radio and I remember it being on the TV, and I read the books, but to see the scripts and the way that they make, because obviously being radio scripts, they can't do anything visual. They just can't, by definition. And how you can still make things come alive, it's incredible.
So we have a few minutes off. Remind everyone who's been listening and as fascinated as I am by talking to you, what they're going to go away and buy if they haven't already got both the books.
Ooh, I don't know. Nah, don't have an answer for that one, I'm afraid.
Just give us a recap of your two books.
The two books, okay, right. So Waking the Tiger, set in 1939 in Singapore. Inspector Max Betancourt, newly arrived from CID, now in the Marine Police, and the body of a Japanese woman thought to be a prostitute is found at the docks, apparently having committed suicide, but Betancourt thinks differently. And we learn a lot in that book about the trafficking of women, Japanese women in particular, into Singapore. We learn a lot about Betancourt and his life and his world and his family and various things, and how he came to be where he was. So the second one, it's probably in sort of fictive time, about 6 months later. He is now investigating the death of an American archaeologist, which starts off just as a body wrapped up in a fishing net. Turns out to be an American archaeologist who was researching something that's known as the Singapore Stone, which is a pre-colonial artifact, which is still in existence in the Singapore Museum. And the body is found with 2 large balls of opium in it, and that takes Betancourt off on the trail of opium in Singapore.
And then all that's left for me to say is thank you. Donna has said that she is going to seek you out on Saturday and would love to buy both books if you happen to have any on you.
Oh, well, I'll bring them along.
You have a busy social calendar before you go to New Zealand. You're selling Donna, meeting Patsy for coffee. And then just thank you so much for being a really entertaining interview.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. I look forward to it.